we had an insight in great detail about the theoretical aspects of the arson and explosive investigations. But as we all know, in life, practical knowledge is more important and it should go hand in hand with the theoretical aspects. So, our expert, Mr. Robert Schaal, has shared some of the cases that he worked on. Also, he has provided a 3D view of the cases that acted as a cherry on the cake. So, without any further delay, let's begin.
An example of this would be, this was a house fire. I worked here in Louisiana. It was ultimately accidental ignition, failure of a window air conditioning unit. But as we come to a property, the first thing we're going to do is do a 360-degree assessment. We're going to look at the property, look at where hot gases and byproducts exited the structure. Here we see the front door and a window obviously failed at some point during the fire and allowed hot smoke and gases to come out of the property. So then as we move to this side, we have 3 windows on this side, and we see a significant V pattern here where hot smoke and gases exited the environment, but these windows back here don't seem to have as much damage. This middle one has a little bit of heat damage, but in comparison to this, we certainly had more fire effects coming through this window than these 2 windows. Then on the back, again, up here at the gable vent, you do see some evidence of smoke and gas coming out of the structure, but nothing compared to the other window in the front that we saw. And then moving to the other side, again, you see another window where we have significant evidence of heat and smoke exiting this particular window. And this is just kind of a more complete picture of this. You see this door doesn't appear to be damaged, no real evidence of anything coming out of that door. And then this window, which ultimately led to a bedroom, no real evidence of smoke or hot gases exiting through it. So after we do our external assessment, then we start moving inside. And obviously, we look at the furnishings, kind of make an assessment, try and put them back where they were pre-fire, clean up some of the debris that the fire department leaves around, kind of trying to get a good picture of what happened, and then use the patterns on the furniture to assess how the fire traveled through the structure. And in this case, we did find some wiring or evidence of an extension cord in the bedroom, documented it via photograph, ultimately sifted it to collect some of the blades of the cord to retain them for potential evidentiary value. As we try and determine origin and cause, we will examine other heat sources and see if they could have played a factor or eliminate them. Here, I looked at this heater, determined that it was in the off position, no internal damage showing that potential signs of failure. It wasn't close to combustibles, so therefore I was able to eliminate it and move on to other causes. So I ultimately collected the air conditioner for evidentiary purposes and retained it. This is what the property looked like inside after I did my reconstruction. I cleaned it all the way to the floor. I put the sofas back where they belong. And so we could start looking at heat movement patterns on the boundary surfaces. We can kind of see where this pattern here kind of elevates. So that's an indication that hot gases were moving from our right to the left. You look at this door here. This is an indication that this door was in the open position and hot smoke and gases were going into this room. As hot smoke and gases move away from the fire, they do start to cool, but they are more buoyant, so they do accumulate upward. So we can look at this sofa here, or love seat compared to this sofa, and we do get some indication that we had burning here, but also recall on the outside there was an air conditioning unit in this window that fell out early in the fire, and it didn't have a lot of damage. So we can attribute all of this damage to ventilation and say it's not a point of origin. So as we move deeper, again, we can see how the fire kind of traveled from this way into the bedroom, into the rest. You know, we look at the ceiling, and there was another lining over this that failed, but we get a lot of hot smoke and gas movement in this area that did not really directly correspond to our damage over here. So then we start looking in this bedroom, and this room has significantly more damage than the living room in comparison. Certainly there's damage out here. It's not habitable anymore, but this room had significantly more damage. And if you recall, there was a window air conditioner in this window as well, and it showed signs of internal heat damage and was significantly more impacted than the air conditioner on the other side. So as we get in the room, you can kind of see there was a bed here. We excavated or dug out the debris on the floor to kind of get an indication of the heat and movement patterns within this compartment. We ended up collecting a number of items of evidence, including a electrical receptacle here. That cord that I showed you earlier was plugged into this receptacle and run along the floor and energized the air conditioner back here in this window. And so it's basically running right along here. This is the area that I sifted and ultimately recovered that plug blade from. This is that heater that we examined. The electrical load center or breaker panel was right here. So it had a lot of damage to it, but certainly didn't contribute to the fire. And I think I determined that the fire started in this air conditioner unit back here. But you can kind of see how we do an assessment of damage, a compare and contrast, and we use the visual impacts of the fire on the boundary surfaces to help lead us back to the fire origin. And once we get to the area of origin, then again, we can start trying to determine fire cause. And this is just another, comparison as we get deeper into the structure. You can see that the kitchen is not as damaged as the living room or bedroom. But again, we get movement patterns. Like if you look on this refrigerator, you kind of see this upward V pattern. Again, that's an indication of hot smoke and gases coming out of the origin bedroom here and moving this way. And again, that pattern that we saw there, all of these, again, we utilize to help us trace the impacts back to where we define an area of origin. Sometimes it's a room, sometimes it's a corner of a room, sometimes it's a building. But the smaller we make it, the better. It helps us clearly be able to look for potential causes in the area of origin. Example of the origin and cause investigation process is a house fire that I worked in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. After investigation, I ultimately determined that it was spontaneous ignition of oily rags that a contractor or tradesman had improperly disposed of on the property as he was staining some cabinets. This case was aided by the origin cause process was aided by a home surveillance video across the street. So this is the property that was affected by fire, and they had a Nest camera on the front of the house looking at it. You can see some glow in this window back here, and then you'll start seeing these front windows here lighting up, and then they will, you see the glow, and then it'll start to die down as the fire builds up and kind of almost chokes itself out. You see these windows dark, but you still see back here, you still see some glow. And you see a little bit of smoke exiting. Kind of fire's kind of choking it down a little bit more here. More smoke exit. And then once that window fails, it's almost like a jet engine. We get a lot of hot smoke and gas exit there. So I didn't see this video until after I did my investigation, but it certainly helped me use this information to test the hypotheses that I had made while I was doing the scene investigation and help more or less support my conclusions. So this is the property. And again, I did my typical 360-degree assessment. But here's that window that we saw that big fire jet from. An interesting note about this fire is it had a insulation material that was combustible, and the fire kind of reignited after initial suppression, so it caused significant more damage to the property after the first fire. So I had to factor all of that into my origin and cause examination as I looked at it. So again, we look at this, we can see hot smoke and gas impacted the siding, came through these windows. This is the window where we saw that big vent from. So we can look at this damage here and use that as some indicator. If there's uneven burning, we could say more fire came out of one side or the other. Here it was pretty uniformly burned, but certainly this had more damage than most of the other windows, and certainly more damage than the windows on the front of the structure. So as we get into the structure, you can see how the second story has started to collapse. All of the insulation material is covering the flooring. So of course, what we're going to want to do is we're going to excavate that, try and find whatever furnishings were in here, see what other items of evidentiary value were in there. So ultimately, we cleaned all of that up and did as much reconstruction as we could. But this is the inside of that window. Again, you can see significant mass loss to this header piece. A lot of what we call alligatoring here. More damage to, you appear to have a wood stud missing over here. You can see that the roof supports are damaged from the downside moving upward. All indications that this was our compartment of origin. So as we started doing excavation, We removed a lot of that insulation material, got it out of the way. There was a kind of a wooden cabinet in this area. This was like a kitchen island. So we start trying to reconstruct it best we can. And you can see to some extent, this side is more damaged than this side. The fronts of these drawers are not as damaged as the center here or these here. So indication that this side of the cabinet received more damage than this, kind of helping us identify how the fire progressed through the structure. Again, a little more cleaning. We kind of clear out this wooden cabinet a little bit more. And again, there's a little more damage down at this side than this side, but this was significantly damaged as a whole. But you can see the remains of paint cans and stain cans throughout the structure that we located during excavation, all supporting evidence that the vendor was there painting and staining. The paint really doesn't, in this instance, really wasn't the hazard. It was really the oil-based stain that created the issue. So again, we look at everything, and again, this is a better indication that there's more damage than this side. Even though this piece of furniture is significantly damaged, this side gives us more indication that our area of origin or area of interest is more on this side of the cabinet than this side. So we retained all of these paint cans just to have them for evidence. Since I wasn't doing any liquid assessment, I just kind of put them in overprotection. I put them in inside of a plastic container and sealed it just to make sure it was protected and preserved for later use if need be. So on the one side of the that big debris pile that we saw, we started digging through there, and that's where I actually found remnants of the plastic garbage bag that the tradesman or contractor, his workers had disposed of the rags in, and that's ultimately where the fire originated. When we assess a fire, even when we have what we believe is the origin and cause, certainly there are other interested parties that may think something else started it. So we try and preserve everything we can. So if somebody else came to look at it later, they would be able to evaluate the same items we looked at. When possible, we try and get all of the fire investigators on the scene at the same time, so we do a contemporaneous inspection. But if we think something might get damaged or destroyed, we do take it during our initial scene inspection, so other fire investigators would have an opportunity to look at it later should they have an interest. So again, we just document where the item came from, tag both sides, so we have an indication of if we bring it back to the scene, they can more or less put it back in place and make the same assessment of it in its condition as it was at the time of the fire. So this is kind of a view standing in the kitchen, looking back into the great room, living room. This over here is the area where I found the remains of the trash can, and there was like a cardboard box of a foam mattress stored there. The people had just purchased the house and they were renovating it prior to move-in, so it wasn't fully furnished. There was just a few items of furniture in it, and they had just gotten a new mattress. That's one of those memory foam that was kind of sucked down and inside of cardboard box, and that's kind of all the remains of it over here. So this is the window where we saw the fire jet in the video. And then as we go back this way, this was kind of a butler's pantry, and then we had a dining room here. This is one of those windows where we saw the glow build and then die down. And you can see there's some soot staining on the window. But as we move this way towards the front of the house, we have less damage than we do back here. And you can also see significant damage where the second story has failed and fire progressed ultimately from here all the way up through the roof. So now we're more in the middle of it. You can see these are the paint cans that we ended up collecting. More paint and stain cans here. There were stain cans over here. So a lot of evidence that staining had been going on by the tradesmen or contractors. Again, we look at this mass loss here, all indication that supports if we had a fire here and was progressing this way, all of this damage is supportive of that. And then as we look up, you can see that the fire basically went up through the second story, ultimately through the roof of the structure. So this is just kind of step back a little bit. Again, we use this piece of furniture. Again, this damage is consistent with the fire originating here and kind of progressing outward. And this is kind of even better picture. You can see how the fire progressed all the way up through the second story, through here, and ultimately vented through the attic and roof of the structure. Oops, sorry, did not mean to zoom in like that. But you see how we have to get in there. We have to remove all of the debris to kind of figure out what furnishings were in there, and then do a comparison of the patterns, fire effects, how they were impacted by the fire event, and use that to assess how the fire grew and developed. Here, the walls don't really tell us much because they were non-combustible, but certainly this type of damage indicates that we had significant fire back here. And as you go out into the other rooms of the structure, as we get out of this area, there's less damage over here, less damage up in the front of the house. Certainly the kitchen cabinets, they were combustible, they burned, but it's all consistent with fire traveling from this area to this way versus fire up here coming back here. The video certainly supports that, because this is the first area we see that glow, and then of course we see a buildup of light up here. Then it dies down as the fire grows and develops, and ultimately starts to choke itself out.
Thank you for watching our video. If you liked our initiative, please like, share and subscribe to the Forensic Corner for more of such great content.